All right, before you listen to my story, I need you to have an open mind. My wife and I met at a rock climbing event in the old western United States. We were married 6 years before we decided to go on a very hippie-like retreat that had about 50 people attending it, mostly couples that were against traditional stereotypes and what normal behavior is. So, yes, there was nudity and other things there that society would most likely frown upon. Before we even got settled in the camp, we promised each other we would not have sex with anyone else on each other. We enjoyed the getaway in nature with like-minded individuals, but we weren't okay with breaking our promise to each other. Or so I thought. On the second night there, we attended the bonfire that was held each night during the stay. Groups of people formed and we started great conversations with anyone in hearing range. My conversation wasn't always the same one my wife was having, but I didn't mind or notice anything weird about that night. Looking back now, it was probably the first night she spoke to the man Bill called Doug. We partied hard for the next few days and started sticking with a specific group of people that included Doug. Some days and nights are a blur, but I don't necessarily remember being separated from my wife at any time during the vacation. When we got home, my wife was really happy and exceptionally peaceful. Over the course of a year, my wife became a little more fake. She didn't tell me any of her thoughts and would get defensive if I said she looked sad or upset about something. Well, I had the feeling that our relationship was coming to an end. Despite my attempts to rekindle the flame, it was around this time that I found a letter in the mail. It was opened and crumpled up in the bottom of the trash. The only reason I found it was because our dog had knocked over the can. It was from Doug to my wife. He wrote about taking off her clothes and escaping their daily lives with each other. In the end, he asked if she would meet him at a hotel on a specific weekend. I was shaking. I could not believe my wife was still communicating with this man from over a year ago. I couldn't believe she never told me anything about it, but instead kept pretending she was content being my wife. I hired a PI to follow her and watched the hotel mentioned in the letter. When my wife came to tell me about a friend of hers reaching out unexpectedly and inviting her out to a bachelorette party, I knew it was BS. I intentionally grilled her and asked her a lot of completely justified questions. I even asked for the girl's phone number, and she refused, complaining that I didn't trust her. I pretended she persuaded me and had a good point. I mentioned how I trusted her to be a good and loyal wife because that's all she'd ever been to me. I swear, I saw her cringe when I said that. As soon as she left, I informed the PI to be on the lookout. In 30 minutes, he started sending me pictures. It was her greeting and giving a warm embrace to none other than Doug. It was surreal to see it happening. Sometime later, I got the rest of the pictures, which was enough to prove they spent time alone in a hotel and have no problem kissing on the lips. I pride myself on being a handyman, so after I threw up, I changed the locks on her doors. When she tried to return home the next day after her nice little weekend affair, she was disturbed to find that her house key no longer worked. And I refused to answer the calls. After standing outside the house for 2 hours, her mom came and picked her up. I didn't know what lies she was telling her, but it gave me comfort to know she was panicked. She had no choice but to stay with her mom until I finally came over to their house. It was the first time in 2 weeks that she saw my face or heard from me, and she broke down sobbing. She tried to hug me, and I held my arm out straight to stop her. She cried and begged me to listen, but all I did was show her the pictures the PI sent me. She told me she was sorry. She let her feelings get way out of control for this guy, and she regretted everything she'd done. I told her I'd think about getting back together, but I only said it because I needed her to let me leave. It's a good thing I didn't take her back right then, because a few months later, she discovered she was pregnant. I didn't mention it until now, but at this time, she and I had a 2-year-old daughter that she was missing terribly. Her parents lived in a retirement home, so they weren't allowed to have anyone living with them, especially not children. It was bad enough they were hiding their daughter there, but now she was expecting a child from an affair. Her dad was appalled. Shortly after she was officially divorced from me, I found out that Doug, the father of her unborn child, was a married man. He would have nothing to do with her or their child. I also found out that my wife and Doug had physical relations at the couple's retreat. We went on a year and a half before and had been seeing each other ever since. She always tells me she deeply regrets what she's done, but it doesn't matter anymore. Everyone has to live with the consequences of their selfish decisions and mistakes. I hope she's able to learn from hers. Wow, OP, I am so glad to hear that you have the maturity and respect to handle the situation the way you did. It takes a wise and considerate man to be able to do that after what she did to you. I believe you made the right decision and handled it well. It's not easy to remember that the world is an ending, but when a relationship must end, it's natural to be a little sad, but overall willing to let go and move on from there. The world is full of people and opportunities for growth and improvement. I wish you the best of luck in life. Now for today's second story. I was in the foster care system until I got married. When I turned 18, I was living with foster parents that I lived with for about a year and a half. Around that time, I started taking courses in community college. That's where I met my wife, Julie. She was charming and bright when she spoke to me. She stood out against any girl I ever met, and I was immediately smitten. We had sneaky, unprotected sex for a year and a half while attending college together until she became pregnant with our first child. We were kind of forced to get married faster than I would have liked to. We were really young and simply did not have the guidance. I wish we had. Our elders were all Christian and extremely traditional, so the wedding was pretty much planned for us. We attended mandatory marriage counseling before we got married, but we were never asked any deep or real personal questions. It was mostly focused on what the Bible said about marriage, not about how we were feeling or thinking about all this. I was still in love with Julie, so we went through with the marriage and had our daughter. When my wife fell pregnant a second time, our baby was just 4 months old. After we had 2 babies, we needed a large income as quickly as possible, due to my foster care background and lack of stability. I found that impossible to stick to a job for longer than a year. It was like torture to try focusing on any task for most of the day, for most of the year, and for most of my life. I never had to commit to anything this long. And speaking of that, our sex life was starting to dull already. I guess I took out my frustrations on my wife, sometimes without realizing it, and I eventually started looking for other people to talk to using my phone. My wife discovered this, which led to the following disaster. My foster parents were informed of my behavior, including late nights out that they offered Julie a little getaway at their house, while I stayed with the babies. They took her out to eat and stayed up late to watch movies and play games. It was good, innocent fun until I found out otherwise. One day after my wife returned for her getaway, my foster mother took me out to lunch and told me some disconcerting news. Apparently, after she went to bed, Julie came on to my dad while they were watching a movie. After my wife came back home, my dad crumbled at my mom's feet and told her they had sex. He begged her forgiveness. She didn't know how she was going to handle it, but knew she needed to tell me immediately because I deserved to know. I stayed out of the house for a long time while I processed this. When I returned home, my wife already knew that I was informed of her infidelity. She was a wreck. It looked like she had been crying for a while. She begged me to start over with her. She understood. She fucked up. But it was because she didn't feel like we had any connection or communication anymore. I stayed with my foster parents while deciding what to do. Julie had the children while I was away, and it helped me clear my head. I stayed away for 5 weeks to really let my wife lay in the bed she made. She called me every day to talk about how I was feeling and what I needed from her. She video called for me to see the babies. She said she missed me terribly and prayed every day that I'd come back here. I guess her prayers worked because we started attending counseling and seeing psychologists. It worked for some time, but eventually we started feeling each other again. She mentioned that she felt guilt every day and that she would never be able to make up for the pain she caused me. I finally filed for divorce and took the babies with me to my foster parents' house. They were thrilled to get to know the children better and had nothing but time and money to spend doting over them. My wife hated this, but I was determined to keep my children out of the foster care system, and I was going to remain their father. She was miserable and I couldn't trust her to communicate with me or keep me in her lives. She fought tooth and nail in court to win for custody of our children. But since she was accused of infidelity and didn't have a place to live or any income, I was awarded custody. She went on to have more than a few children with other men and never found any stability. The lesson I learned was not to have unprotected sex and never get married quickly. She still pays me child support and only sees the children a few times a year. I certainly wish the efforts and lessons we learned has been enough to repair our relationship. You have quite the tale. Opie, I am sorry your wife sought revenge against you by seducing your foster dad no matter what. There's a chance to save and repair the relationship once the true value of the relationship is learned. A person may become selfless and more willing to communicate fears and hopes to their partner without judgment. For some people, it may be possible to forgive what's happened and save their relationship. But if this is to happen, they must constantly maintain an honest and open conversation while remaining as selfless as possible. A couple that aims to fill their partner's every desire is the way to have a genuinely happy relationship. Communication is just as important as selflessness, so that each partner knows what the other person needs. It can work, but if the relationship fails to recover, don't be surprised. Instead, become your own support and best friend, so that when all else fails, you're mentally prepared. I wish you the best of luck going forward. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. Take care.